It's interesting to see the whole situation with PlayStation unfolding. It's clear that more and more as information is coming out with the direction Sony is heading in, they are changing their policies, they are changing their, mindset, and everything is going now towards engagement. Clearly selling 18, well, according to them 80 million, according to the PlayStation fans, but we're going to get to that in a bit because I kind of riled a lot of feathers with that one. But that's clearly not working, especially when you look at the attach rate of said amount of consoles being sold. It's just not enough. And if you're looking at games like Spider-Man 2, which had a mammoth 315 million budget, it's not even known if that even broke even or if it made a minor profit. I'm assuming at that point Sony must have realized this just isn't working. Now there are games like Ghost of Tsushima which made massive profit. Astro Bot probably made massive profit too. But then there are those AAA ones, and as you can see from their cadence in releasing them, they're just not working. They're not coming out fast enough. And their ambition to push straight into live service with like 13 games, hoping one of them would succeed, and they did with Helldivers 2, but they needed at least one that was like a proper cash cow, unlike Helldivers, which, let's face it, over half their revenue came from microtransactions. It's clear to see that, going down the live service approach, had it worked or had they given it a real chance, it could have been a real earner. But they decided to kind of pivot away from that ever so slightly because they are still working on live service games. But then they released that application that, every PlayStation fan out there, well, 99% of them, damage controlled like their life depended on it. It was like there was, it was like a light shined above them and said, you need to protect Sony and you need to basically make up any excuse, flying pigs, unicorns, you name it. As long as it can convince people that this isn't happening and you can convince yourself, that is okay. And so that went on for a little while. And then, of course, as of today, after my original tweet, because let's face it, Sony likes me and I like Sony. And Sony saw what was happening and the way I was being racially abused and whatnot. And, people are actually defending that stuff as well from the PlayStation community. Pretty sickening stuff. But Sony saw all this and said, right, I got your back. And they said, we're just going to release a little statement for you so you can kind of use that and just push the stuff away. And of course, like clockwork, they started damage controlling this as well. Well, you've got this over here. Sony Senior Vice President Sadahiko Hayakawa says that they are gradually shifting their gaming business from a hardware-centric business model, shifting it in 2025 to a community and engagement-based platform business model. Basically what Microsoft has. Now, they're not saying that they're not going to release games on PlayStation. They're not saying they're moving completely away from the hardware model, but they are saying that they are moving where PlayStation only focused on that as a business model. Everything stayed on PlayStation. That is no longer the case. Their games are going to go everywhere else. Now, whether that's day and date or a timed exclusive is unknown. I'm assuming it's going to be timed so they can at least give their platform a little bit more cadence, but the notion of that walled garden is breaking down. Now, of course, when you're looking at what he said, in the gaming business, we are moving away from hardware-centric business model, more to a platform business that expands the community and increases engagement. Now, this is exactly what Hiroki Totoki was saying as well, where he wants basically profits and more engagement. And so Sony went from, we've got this many console sales and this many this and this many that to, now we're doing MAUs. They never really talked about it in 2018, even though they released someone released a brief statement saying that, MAUs are a factor that they're looking at. But it wasn't until Microsoft actually really screamed from the rooftops that we have 500 million MAUs that they decided to finally step up and say, hey, we might want a piece of this as well, because the more people that you have playing your games, the more chance that you have that they're going to spend in the microtransaction store. And that is where the real profits lie. But of course, people are going to try and damage control this. Now, apparently in 2021, they basically came and said the same thing. We're not doing a business-centric model. That's not true. And this statement over here, it doesn't add any weight to what's actually up the top. Specifically during the results presentation, Sony Senior Vice President Naomi Matsuda discussed the growth of operating income in the Games and Network Services division, which houses PlayStation, by mentioning a shift in internal strategic thinking away from unit sales and hardware attach rate. This isn't the core focus of the console though, and they're talking about the core hardware, nothing about software. Hardware is where they're at here. So this is already coping, and this is already trying to damage control and basically use information from the past that is no longer relevant, and towards metrics of time spent on a console and its services. Now, clearly this isn't talking about an attach rate, this isn't talking about anything, this is talking about the hardware-centric business, right? And that is making the consoles, creating a walled garden, and making sure that that console is where everything is. Now, Sony has been enjoying the bounties of PC and a little bit of Nintendo, and a little bit of Xbox as of now, especially with their live service games. Helldivers 2 apparently has a lot of actual pre-orders going towards it, and if the rumors are true, apparently it's actually exceeding the number of people that actually bought the game on PlayStation. Now, I don't know if that is true. That was literally told to me about half an hour ago, so take that with a grain of salt. I am not claiming validity on that. I'm just saying these are the bits of information that are going around. Now, clearly Sony has these numbers, so they know exactly what they're talking about. But this is just another step, another affirmation that Sony is finally moving and broadening itself out there. Now, this isn't a bad thing, and as fans of the PlayStation-centric community will tell you, this is like the end of times, but it's really not. Especially with the games costing so much these days and people just not buying enough games, it's becoming a problem. And at the end of the day, that only leads to layoffs. If that means that porting to other platforms means that they can avoid that, happy days. If it also means that, you know, they find ways to get those games to other audiences that can finally play them. And at the end of the day, let's face it, the hybrid that's coming out next year and by Asus potentially, and Xbox in 2027, at least that's what people are saying, Xbox is going to be able to play all these games anyway by default through their hardware, so it doesn't really matter. But in the current time, at least within the next 18 months, it makes sense for them to start porting, and I'm sure they're working on other games as well right now. But this, you know, from Sadahiko Hayakawa, is clear indication that Sony has finally kind of stepped down from that whole walled garden situation and moved to a more open platform. And they're openly telling you, you know, it's plain English, and the way people are trying to damage control this is just crazy. In the gaming business, we are moving away from a hardware-centric business model more to a platform business that expands. Platform, which is basically what Xbox has done. Now, like I said, I don't expect day and date, maybe in the future, but not right now. But what they're after right now is engagement, especially on those IPs that aren't making any more money, like Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2, and so forth. These games aren't making any money. Now, I know a lot of people are coping and saying it's live service only. You don't have any more live service games. So I get the mental gymnastics and I get the need to protect your precious Sony, but the reality is this is happening. And whether it's going to be a slow drip or a kind of flowing river in terms of how quick it happens is unknown. But just one thing we can be assured of, it's not going to be like a steamed, it's not going to be like a train coming crashing in at full speed like Microsoft did. Sony will take their time, and that is, you know, the Sony way. It's the Japanese way, to be fair. They always take their time to make it gradual rather than cause issues. So I don't know. This to me tells me everything I need to know. I know people are twisting this and going back to 1847 with their notes and stuff from, back in Harlem and whatnot, and trying to figure out a way to twist this and use this and kind of damage control this and find excuses. It's just not worth it. And at the end of the day, why does it even hurt you so much? Especially after you saw what was happening with Xbox. It just doesn't make sense. It gets worse, right? Well, better for Sony in my opinion, because their acquisition of Bungie, which has turned into one of their worst acquisitions of all time, it just gets worse. Sony CFO Lin Tao says Bungie is in the process of becoming part of PlayStation Studios. This independence is getting lighter. Basically, they're saying they're going to, their independence is almost over. They are going to be fully absorbed in. Will this mean a Destiny 3? Who knows? Will this mean that Destiny itself will change to an over-the-shoulder Walking Dead simulator, and maybe we'll get actual story-based versions of the game? Who knows? I'm all for it. At the end of the day, I'm not one of those people that hate Sony games. I enjoy them. It's why I buy their platforms. So Bungie is shifting into a role which is becoming more a part of PlayStation Studios, and integration is also proceeding. So it's pretty much started. And if you've seen the actual latest numbers for their new expansion that just came out, it's not good. Their numbers weren't good. I mean, they were lower than the final shape, which was supposed to be like their big hurrah, and that was actually lower than the previous expansion, which was pretty bad. Lightfall was pretty bad, but that's the one that really lost all confidence. But then we're over here, right? And they say in the long term, you can see this as an ongoing process to the direction. So the direction is to become part of PlayStation Studios. That's it. So the whole Bungie situation is going to be resolved sooner rather than later, especially by the time next generation lands. And then we have this, which is quite amusing, because I made a post today based on these numbers from the official PlayStation document. And so, as you can see here from 2021, you had massive jumps. Like in 2021, they had 10 million, and obviously this is when silicon was really difficult to come by. Then they made 20 million jump, a 10 million jump, and then a 10 million jump. And you can see like in 23, they had between 2022 and 23, June and December, they made in that year, they basically made roughly about 20 million, but then they stopped responding. They didn't bother reporting the 2024 numbers. And this is evident because we actually know what those numbers are. So on the 12th, December the 9th, this is pre-Christmas, they had 50 million units. Now, obviously, this might be like 51, 52. We'll never know the exact number. But we do know that in April of 2024, this includes, so that will include the Christmas sales and the Christmas stuff that was going along where they make their big sales. They only made 6 million sales. Now, I say only, it's still a lot of sales, right? But it went to 56 million. So you can see clearly that the numbers that they were aiming for clearly went down, and they weren't happy with it overall, and so they stopped reporting on it. You only stop reporting on numbers when you're not happy, or they miss target, or they're just not projecting well, right? That's why you do it. Xbox stopped reporting on console numbers for that same reason. Sony and Microsoft stopped responding on how many subs they've got for their subscription service for that same reason. Disney recently has announced that they're not revealing their subscription sales numbers anymore. Why do you think that is? For the same reason. If a company stops responding to said numbers, it's because they're not projecting well. It's simple as that. But Sony has this habit where they've changed from sell-through to shipped, and those are two different, numbers. But over here you can see, I took the piss, right? I'll take the L on that one. I took the piss. Sony have up to 30 million PS5 sitting in warehouses. That really should have said 20 million. I don't know why I put 30 million. Clearly, I was drunk on the Kool-Aid. I'll take the L on that one. It should have said up to 20. But even people are arguing with that. Now, based on the fact, the numbers I've given you, where as of April 2024, they only went up to 16 well, they went up by 6 million. So they're at 56 million units. Keep in mind that VGC also said that there's about 20% of those consoles sitting in a warehouse that's just not been turned on. They're just sitting there on shelves or in a warehouse, just not turned on. Simple as that. They're not active, so they haven't been sold. So with that in mind, and this information in mind that we've got, and the information of April, a 60 to 65 million point, with the high end being at 65, maybe 67. Like I said, I'm rounding it up to the 5. I think that's where it is, right? Personally. And I think there's basically around 15 million, give or take, sitting on shelves, in warehouses, and stuff like that. You know, Sony holding stuff for replacements, for repairs, etc. The 83 million that they've talked about just isn't it. That's not how many that's how many they've shipped or they've got sitting there, but that's not how many they've sold, because they've stopped with this. Now, obviously, people read up to this point here because that's where Twitter allows it, and they didn't click on the read more to see this. And based on the numbers that I've given you, am I wrong with my assessment in saying that there's probably around 15 million sitting on store shelves? You can go into any store today and you can ask them for a PS5 and they will have stock. That means any store you want. There's not a single store that's sold out. What does that tell you? Every single shop that you go to, that I've been to in the UK over the past few weeks, but I've been asking anyway, just to see if they've got stock for Xbox and PlayStation. Xboxes they don't really have in stock because Microsoft just doesn't supply them. It's really that simple. And because, I don't know, you know, they're done with the console side of things. Whereas, I mean, I know they're releasing a new console, but they're done with the series console side of things. But PlayStations are in plenty of stock everywhere, which means that they haven't sold that 83 million shit because they're still sitting on shelves. And so my assumption here was 15 million, and they have gone on a massive field day with this. And sadly, you know, the worst of the worst have come out as well. I've blocked at least 3 people today who were being racist, who were being disrespectful to people with medical challenges and stuff like that. Like, I don't get it. Like, was what I said here that bad for you to start going into those territories? It's so awful. It's so awful. And then you had people actually supporting the racism and the bigotry. And it's like, my God, like, you're doing this publicly. I get it, it's a soccer account, so they can do what they want. And this is why I'm happy that they're kind of doing this whole ID thing. And they should actually go one step further and actually require your real ID. So these people can't do that anymore. And if they do that, there'll be repercussions. That said, though, my numbers in my methodology of working out make sense. But these guys are going through all sorts of mental gymnastics to try and figure out. I mean, they only read the 30 million, which I'll admit was taking the royal piss. Right? I even said on my stream earlier today, that was taking the piss, right? That basically tells you that they haven't sold a single unit since 2023. Clearly, that's a goddamn troll. Clearly, that is taking the piss, right? There's no two ways of looking at this. That is taking the piss. But I do believe that since then, they've sold about 15 million units. Maybe if we're going to stretch it, maybe 20 million. But I think it's around 15 million because based on the 2024 April, the numbers reduced. And we're looking at Christmas, the busiest time, being included in that 6 million, where they sold 2 million on its own. So, or maybe 3 million, I think it was back then. I can't remember exactly. I couldn't find the MPD for it. But I know it was a ridiculous number because at that time, Microsoft was more expensive than a PS5. And they were bundling a game with it as well. So, you know, Sony did the right thing and they smashed it out of the park with the sales. But I think that based on that, you know, knowledge and criteria, my thing saying here is correct. So you've got on one side, they can't handle the fact that they haven't sold 80 million units because they actually believe that they actually sold 80 million units, which is ludicrous, right? because we don't even have to make any profit on these machines. So they're actually potentially losing money, but these machines aren't being turned on. That's not a win. If they're not even being turned on or in people's houses, that's why sell-through rate is really important, because these are the numbers where people have purchased them. We obviously don't have those Xbox numbers. I wonder why. So I'm not going to sit here and just say this is, you know, PlayStation, but, you know, I've always been fair here, except for that 30 million. That was royally taking the piss. But they've literally lost the plot. As you can see, it's 108 messages. My channel isn't even monetized. I could have made some bank off this as well. Oh well. But you know, in a day when this happened, and then the vice president comes out and basically says, we're not really looking at platform anymore as the main centric business model. We're looking at engagement. And the actual, what we want is PSN everywhere. We want PSN on GOG. We want PSN on Steam. We want PSN on here. I mean, their ideal world, that is what it would be. PSN on Xbox, on Switch. You sign in and you become a PlayStation customer and you play through their portal. In their world, that is what makes sense. Whether that's actually going to materialize or they're going to let people play through. Obviously, the live service games or anything that has online is going to need PSN, but anything that's single player might not, and they have started removing those to try and boost sales on those platforms. But you've clearly seen that their tides are changing. You've seen that Bungie is pretty much going to be no more, and well, with this, it really did bring out the worst of the people. And I don't even think I said anything that bad. Did I really say anything that bad? Leave a comment below and let me know. Did I say anything that bad here? Outside of the 30 million trolling, that took the piss. I'll take that. I'll take the L on that one. That really should have said 20 million. But let me know in the comment section below what you think. Let's have that discussion, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Remain legend.